Narayana namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam mudirayet. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Hi Krishna. So we continue our discussion from the previous session of the third canto, fifth chapter. We will make an attempt to conclude this because these are chapter summaries. We tend to focus on different topics if we find that there's a series of verses which basically deal with the same topic. So, as opposed to dealing with specific verses, we summarize the verses because they are dealing with the same topic. And the general structure of the class would be that we speak about it first and then read the verses, the translation only, given the time constraint. And then we offer some additional explanation as we go along. I was just wanted to share this just so that the newcomers have an understanding of the structure of our discussion. It'll also be very helpful if devotees read before they come, and this in turn would allow them to have um, a better opportunity to participate in the discussion because there's also going to be Q&A which we have, and all questions are welcome. So basically, I was just wanting to say that uh, a little preparation from your side would also assist in my being able to share things so that we could have a nice discussion after the fact as well. So the previous session, we basically spoke a little bit about the fact that Sri Vidura had come in touch with Maitreya Rishi, and he had taken shelter of Sri Maitreya Rishi as a conveyor of messages from Krishna himself. This is extraordinary. It is extraordinary in the sense that what started out as being ostracized and thrown out of the assembly of the Kurus for Sri Vidura, he was literally thrown out of the assembly of Kurus because he wasn't participating in their plans. He wasn't participating in the offensive activity of them going against the desire of the Lord and also offending the Pandavas who are dear devotees. So, as a consequence, he was thrown out. And this throwing out was also an arrangement of the Lord. Sometimes we would want to understand that there might be unfortunate circumstances of life, and unfortunate circumstances of life are to be understood as being auspicious versus inauspicious by observing the effect of such activities, such experiences on devotional service. So, yes, all of us, practically the entire creation, is going through karma. So, of the 6 billion, 6.5 billion plus population in this world, everybody is going through the results of their action from the previous lifetime. They're experiencing certain benefits, and they're also experiencing certain distress on account of the activities that were begun in several lifetimes. Now, very few have the ability to make changes towards the course of their destiny. There's very little room for maneuvering. The whole idea of being able to maneuver and being able to change direction comes only to those who are aspiring to remain in the mode of goodness, who are trying to make an attempt to come to the mode of goodness. In the lower modes of passion and ignorance, there isn't room for maneuvering. You go along with the particular mode because the mode is going to force you to act in whichever way you're supposed to act. And there really isn't the ability to discriminate. The mode of ignorance from the process of thinking cannot focus on the present because they are actually situated in the past. So there are issues which they would face, which particularly would make them focus on activities that have transpired, and they have experienced trauma, and this can extend to several lifetimes. They wouldn't even sometimes know what the trauma is, and then they experience the trauma, and it leaves very deep impressions on the chitta, on consciousness. There's very deep impressions that are left by trauma that's been experienced over several lifetimes. And then in the present, they experience symptoms of mental disharmony, mental mental ill health, which is quite prevalent in the present climate because there really isn't much which they can do, and the modern systems of therapy and so on and so forth is very limited in actually being able to correct it because the karma has already transpired several centuries back. Now, those of us who have come into devotional service have a very good opportunity for us to be able to set a course for the future by resolving the past, and we're able to move forward. So those in the mode of ignorance who are not in touch with the process of devotional service, they develop issues of mental health, and they live in the past and they process life through the past. This is basically a very fundamental issue. But those who are in devotional service, even if they come with such baggage, have the ability to receive solutions by which they can chart out and change the course of life and modify their future very powerfully. So, this is very important for us to realize that the devotional service is being done by very few in the planet, and those few have the ability to change the course of destiny because they are in the mode of goodness and they're aspiring for the mode of goodness. As a consequence, they have the ability to maneuver and make changes. So there is free will, and the free will, which is basically used with the desire of wanting to please Krishna, can give us great power when you're in devotional service to resolve issues which are insurmountable for most of the population. Most of the population is simply set on a course which has already been set into motion several lifetimes back. So they're situated based on the environment, they're also situated based on the propensities they've drawn from the past, and they have very little ability to make changes. Those in devotional service, we are awarded the opportunity to make massive changes to the future to the extent where our destiny practically has the ability to resolve millions and millions and millions of lifetimes of karmic reactions. There really isn't anything which cannot be resolved if you're in touch with the Supreme Lord, because there is great power. The Bhagavatam says that there's great cooperation between the devotees, the demigods, and Krishna. We're going to read about it more in the discussion today, but I was just wanting to set the stage to say that there's great cooperation between the Supreme Lord, his devotees, the demigods, who are in the mode of goodness because they're created in the mode of goodness, and the souls who are on the planet who are basically wanting to serve Krishna. So there's a lot of cooperation because there's a lot of commonality. And because there's commonality, there's a certain sense of saying that, okay, we do not want to cause great obstruction to these souls simply because they are having desires of wanting to serve Krishna. So this basic understanding remains amongst the higher authorities in the universe who are controlling us. Now, this understanding has to remain for the simple reason that sometimes we basically come in touch with inauspicious circumstances. The way you judge inauspicious circumstances occurring in the lives of devotees is to see whether the inauspicious circumstance is basically resulting in devotional service. Because our judgment of what is auspicious and inauspicious is based on what is going to cultivate devotional service versus what is not going to cultivate devotional service. So we take the example of Sri Vidura. In the case of Sri Vidura, he was thrown out. He was thrown out of the assembly, which in one sense would say was someone being deseated from the power of being a minister in the assembly of kings, and he loses his position, which you can say it compares to people in our particular generation losing their job, losing their position, etc. In the profession. So this is quite a blow from the material perspective, and he basically is deseated from his particular position of being a prime minister. But then he processes the event very powerfully. And he is processing the event by saying that this is the external energy. This external energy, particularly, is subservient to Krishna, and she is acting on the direction of Krishna. She is the cause, and the effect is being observed by me as well. Because she is controlled and she is managed by Krishna, she is the external energy of the Lord. This is the Lord's arrangement. So he is accepting the particular circumstances of being thrown out, which is generally considered inauspicious, as the arrangement of the Lord. And what does he do? He decides to cultivate and increase his spiritual credits. So he keeps going on a parikrama. He goes on a parikrama because his intentions are to serve. He says, okay, I'm going on a parikrama. I'm going to visit the different places of pastimes. I'm going to the different places of potency where the sages gather, and I'm going to gather credits. So he goes on, he embarks on a journey of wanting to accumulate greater credits as he's being thrown out. Now, this is an extraordinarily auspicious circumstance. Now, look at what happened. There was inauspicious from a material perspective. However, the great personality, Vidura, processed the event as being positive because it is connected to Krishna, which means he performed the activity of Trinadapi Sunichena, Taroriva Saishnuna, tolerating the circumstances, accepting the results, as being arranged by the Lord. And then he does what is supposed to be done by devotees. He says, I'm going to act with great determination. I'm going to see what I can do under the best circumstances. What is the circumstance now? How can I use it very powerfully in the service of the Lord? He embarks on this journey of a pilgrimage. And as he embarks on the journey of a pilgrimage, he meets Sri Uddhava. And Sri Uddhava has just had the audience of Krishna, and Sri Maitreya Rishi was also there. So now this whole arrangement is falling in place because Vidura started out by accepting that particular event, which is considered negative by all material calculations, as being arranged by the Lord, and then choosing to do what is best under those circumstances, which is to set out on a pilgrimage. So a chain of events take place when there's a desire to serve, and when one is situated with that particular desire firmly entrenched in the heart. If there's any other desire, then there is what we would call as upadharma, chaladharma. There would be many paths that would emerge if there are other desires. But if there's a singular desire of wanting to extend service, then one has the ability to find that Krishna is already making arrangements in advance for the soul to come close to him. So even before Sri Uddhava was thrown out, an arrangement was being made. Sorry, even before Sri Vidura was thrown out, an arrangement was being made by the Lord himself to give very specific knowledge to Sri Vidura so that he could come closer. So there was greater level of knowledge being made available through the agency of Maitreya Rishi and through the agency of Sri Uddhava. So this is fascinating to see the demonstration of the principle of accepting the circumstances of life as if it's being arranged by the Lord. This is Trinadapi Sunichena Tarori Vasaishnuna. Amani Manadena Kirtine Sadahari. So there's a deep desire to serve. So even if there's such an inauspicious circumstance of losing power, he goes out because there's a deep desire to serve to different pilgrimage sites, and arrangements are already being made for him to come back. You see, this is so wonderful. It's just amazing to see how this is being demonstrated in the Srimad Bhagavatam by the activity of a Mahajan. This is why these personalities are called Mahajans. They're great personalities who represent Krishna in such a wonderful way. They represent bhakti in such a wonderful way that you pick things up from their activity. This is what we are supposed to learn from that. The idea of being able to accept even most inauspicious activity as an arrangement of material energy being connected to Krishna as his external energy. So he is practically saying this cause and the effect, everything is Krishna. So I will just do what is supposed to be done to further my connection with the Lord. So this is being demonstrated. So the point I'm trying to make here is that this idea of discrimination, of wanting to be able to go on a pilgrimage, wouldn't come if one were to be in the mode of passion or ignorance. If in the mode of ignorance, the person would have become depressed and they would have just sat down saying, life is not working out. In the mode of passion, there would have been great anxiety about the future in terms of what the future holds. But in the mode of goodness, even if it is slightly imperceptibly touched by passion and ignorance, one has the ability to discriminate. One has the ability to think through. One has the ability to remember Shastra. One has the ability to take association seriously. And then he is embarking on this journey because he is able to reflect and say, okay, this is the arrangement of Krishna. This cannot happen if one is in passion or ignorance. So one needs to understand that in the previous sessions, we have been reading about Sri Vidura's journey. It is practically demonstrated about how one should process life and how one should process events and accept things as being arranged by the Lord. And this can only happen if we are in a proper environment, which is we are in the mode of goodness internally. And this is only going to happen if you also have a more singular desire of wanting to serve the divine couple. Then what does happen is that a lot of things just open up and opportunities come, and we meet the right kind of devotees for us to be able to move forward, or the right kind of personalities who can guide us, mentor us, etc. And solutions can also be presented for the challenges that we face in life if singularly there's a desire to serve the divine couple. Now, what is also being seen further out is that there's a great discussion between Sri Maitreya and Sri Vidura on what was shared by Krishna to Maitreya to be passed on to Sri Vidura. What was shared was the Chatushloki, and the Chatushloki of Srimad Bhagavatam is practically a foundation of faith. The foundation of faith requires that we know that whom we are faithful to is practically in charge. You see? So the Chatushloki, practically the first step is to understand that there is the ingredient of eternality. Okay, I'm going to be temporal. I'm basically a temporary entity. I have a very temporary existence in certain ways. It is true, but then the fact is that the body is going to get destroyed. There are so many other things that are going to change. However, who can actually control me? Who is basically going to be able to give me the best level of protection? He who is completely eternal. So the first verse, and the second verse, and the third verse, and the fourth verse of the Chatushloki of Srimad Bhagavatam, they practically establish the principles of Sat, Chit, Ananda. The last verse, which is the fourth verse, talks about happiness and the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of what is the goal of life. Ananda, which is the goal of life, which is practically the search of the soul for happiness, because the soul by nature is transcendently situated, is very happy. By nature, the soul is a pleasure seeker. So, what is the nature of that particular happiness? That happiness is partial if it is not eternal. So, there has to be the ingredient of eternality. That happiness is partial if there is a lack of knowledge. So there has to be sambandha. There has to be sambandha of Krishna sambandha. One has to realize who they are. They need to know who Krishna is, and they need to know what kind of activity to perform. All of this is the ingredients of Sat, Chit, and Ananda. So Ananda itself cannot happen unless there is an ingredient of Sat, eternality, and there's the ingredient of knowledge. And then there can be bliss. So Sat, Chit, Ananda is being covered in the four verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, and basically establishing that those four verses are establishing the fact that you need to have goals and you need to search for things that are absolutely on the plane of Satchitananda. Because you by nature are eternal, and then you can't have temporal goals. If you have temporal goals where Krishna is not connected, those goals themselves would be destroyed. This is the second verse. The third verse is that one can be transcendentally situated even by covered by matter. Yeah. Even if you're covered by matter, you could be transcendently situated if internally the sambandha is established that you are a part of the spiritual sky. Yeah, just as the super soul sits in the heart of a stool-eating pig. You see those pigs and dogs, etc., who basically engage in activity which is quite abominable. The super soul, he is in the heart of such entities, giving them intelligence as well. Now, he is not touched by the activities of that animal. He is not touched by the activities of the animal. He is Paramahamsa. He is completely aloof. This whole prospect of being aloof, even though whilst being enmeshed in matter, is being covered in the third verse. So one needs to be transcendently situated, has the ability to be transcendently situated. What is the meaning of being transcendently situated? The transcendental situation of an entity is all about being able to understand who they are in the spiritual sky. If there is sambandha, then there would be the opportunity for engaging in service. There would be an opportunity for engaging in falling in love. There would be an opportunity for engaging in surrender, and then there's service to Krishna. All of this is possible if there is sambandha. Yeah, if there is sambandha. So the whole process of devotional service is been designed to inculcate and increase our sambandha with Krishna so that we recognize who we are in relationship to Him. And by doing so, we become aloof from the activities of the world around us, even though we are situated very firmly in this particular environment. This allows us. Yeah. It is like saying that you go to work, but when you go to work and you're sitting at your desk at your office, do you forget that you are a parent of someone? Do you forget that you are a son of someone? Do you forget that you're married to someone? The answer is no. You remember all of that. In a similar fashion, you could practically be on the planet and you could remember your eternal position. And by remembering your eternal position, you would practically have the ability to transcend and be aloof and not be affected by the happenings around you, which is being covered in the third verse. All of these are the four different chatushlokis, or four verses that are being covered. This is the gist which was given to Sri Brahma. This empowered him to create. This is the gist which was given to Sri Narad Muni by Naranarayan Rishi. This was the gist that was given to Srila Vyasadeva by Sri Narad Muni to write the Srimad Bhagavatam. Sri Vyasadeva took this gist, took it into his heart, and from this gist of four verses sprouted the rest of the verses of Krishna's Leela, which is the Srimad Bhagavatam. Yeah. So these instructions given by Krishna to Sri Maitreya Rishi were being conveyed to Vidura, and that is what we are reading. Now we were on verse 22 the previous session, and I was just wanting to describe a few things before we go into the verses because it'll be easy for us to understand. We should understand the nature of sound, especially those of us who are practicing devotional service under the movement of Lord Chaitanya. We should understand the nature of sound. There is sound which is liberating, that is sound. There is sound which is incarcerating. Yeah. There is sound which is liberating, which is transcendental sound, and there is sound which is incarcerating, which is practically enmeshed in passion and ignorance. Yeah. Our business is to spread the sound which is liberating, which is the transcendental names of Krishna. By spreading this particular sound around the world, we would practically allow the destruction of what has been created due to coming in touch with the lower quality of passion and ignorance, which is also sound. You see, ideas of wanting to live in a certain way, ideas of wanting to engage in sense gratification in a certain way, ideas of wanting to interact with the world and interact with their senses in a certain way. All of this is encouraged by sound energy. Someone speaks, someone sings, someone produces a certain kind of sound, someone entertains. All of these have the ability to sow seeds of desire into the heart of the living entity as they move around in this particular jagat. As they move around in this universe, they move around in the world, they receive sound energy. And first, after sound energy, there's a deeper sense of attachment, there's a deeper sense of creation. Everything begins with sound. Now, transcendental sound, which is Krishna's names, has the ability to upgrade the existence of the living entity. But sound, which is distinctly material, has the ability to degrade the existence of the material entity. So we have to choose as to what we want to do. Do we want to fill ourselves with transcendental sound? And as a consequence, we can practically upgrade the existence of other entities. Or do we want to fill ourselves with downgrading sound, which is passion and ignorance, and we spread it around and degrade the existence of the living entities? As devotees, we need to make a very clear effort to practically empower ourselves with transcendental sound, which is the reason why we chant with such concentration. Japa is so important because japa itself and the hearing and the performance of kirtan is so powerful that this transcendental sound has the ability to subvert and destroy what was created by material energy. So the aspirations of the living entity can completely change. You can observe this particular phenomenon in our own lives. All of us have been transformed by sound. All of us. We were all situated in a certain kind of degrading sound, and then we heard transcendental sound. And as we observed transcendental sound and we embraced transcendental sound, there was a transformation that occurred in our hearts, which practically allowed us to aspire for a future which we could never dream of in the past. Now, what happened? Our entire idea of creation, of what we wanted to do with our lives, has completely changed by coming in touch with transcendental sound to such an extent that whatever was created in the past was destroyed. Because an idea is present in the heart. This idea is watered by the soul's existence on the planet. They associate with people of a similar nature and they water this idea. And as they water this idea fructifies into an existence. And sometimes this existence can incarcerate, sometimes this existence can liberate. So we have to be very, very careful in understanding the power of sound, which is what our movement is all about, which is the reason why this kol, which is the kartal and the mridanga and the doing of Harinam, which was initiating the whole process of our whole Sankirtan movement, started with the idea of chanting Harinam. Yeah, it started with the chanting of Harinam because you go around the streets and you are chanting very deep transcendental sound because you're chanting the names of Krishna, and as a consequence, your sambandha in the heart is also being passed on to the ears of those who hear. Yeah, sambandha is being passed on. In our own lifetime, in the past few years, we saw this extraordinary contribution by His Grace Aindra Prabhu, who sat in Vrindavan. The first time I heard Aindra Prabhu was 1983, 84. That was when he first, I think, he came about, and there was this bunch of, sound, what I would call as recordings that came out, and his voice was quite different then. But the point being that he didn't quite make any special strategy. His strategy was sound. His strategy was sound. This explosion of kirtan that's occurred in the world over the past few years has, I would say, has been contributed immensely by His Grace Aindra Prabhu. He has just contributed. But what did he do? Did he leave Raja? The answer is no. He went from Raja to Mayapur once or twice. He never left Raja until unless he had to he was forced out to leave Raja in certain ways. So the point being that he sat here in Vrindavan and focused on a very primary teaching of Lord Chaitanya. He developed a very, very deep idea of, in the sense, transformation transcendentally. He worked on himself. Let's put it that way. He worked on himself, and by developing a deeper sambandha, his sambandha was conveyed by sound energy, and which was broadcast. It coincided with the coming of the internet. It coincided with the coming of YouTube and whatnot. It was the sound energy practically was not managed by cassette tapes and CDs as it was in the past. It coincided with the internet, which practically allowed souls across the world to contribute, listen, etc. And this practical demonstration of one person sitting down and sincerely chanting Harinam, and then exporting the sound and making it available throughout the world, and everybody else benefiting from it. And from there, there's such encouragement that has come in the hearts of so many young kirtaniyas around the world who have practically embraced the form of kirtan. And these are folks who basically came into Krishna consciousness, and they were encouraged so much by just the aspect of kirtan. So the point I'm just trying to make is that you don't need too much to contribute. What you do need is for us to be able to work on ourselves. If we can work on ourselves, then the idea of kirtan, either the speaking of and glorification of Srimad Bhagavatam, or doing what the Srimad Bhagavatam is suggesting in terms of being able to broadcast Harinam, all of this is so wonderful in being able to demonstrate and destroy material culture and to be able to upgrade the existence of other living entities. So, this is a massive contribution if you're going to do it singularly, sitting in just one place. But if you put your heart into being able to go very deep into transcendental sound, and by going very deep into transcendental sound, you develop a deeper sense of sambandha with Krishna. That sambandha gyan is being passed on when we chant Harinam. So if we are going to be chanting Namaprad, then we pass on Namaprad. If you're chanting Namabas, we pass on Namabas. If we are in Premanam, you're going to be passing on Premanam. So the point is that we have to make an attempt to do kirtan, but we also have to make an attempt to ensure that we are working on ourselves so that the sound that we are passing on is upgrading. It has to be upgrading to the listener. It has to be upgrading to the souls who are very thirsty for them to be able to grab on to something where they could move on and they could kind of make progress in their lives. So, sound is very important because sound is where creation begins. This is a very fundamental fact, and sound is what can be used to practically create a new plan. Lord Brahma received sound. Lord Brahma received instructions of tapasya. He received a mantra. He started doing japa and he started doing his sadhana. And from his sadhana, the whole creation manifested. Take the same idea and then put it forth, and we will find that the deeper we go into our sadhana, the greater would be our contribution to the mission of Lord Chaitanya, because we would be in a position to learn how to be instruments in the hands of the Lord. We are nimitta matras. We are instruments in the hands of the Lord. But how good is an instrument which is extraordinarily independent, which doesn't allow the Lord to use such an instrument? How good and how useful is an instrument which has its own plans? How good is an instrument which practically has you know agendas which are not aligned with Lord Chaitanya's agendas? So that's the reason why the greater our ability to be able to step aside, greater our ability to be used as instruments, greater would be our contribution to upgrading the lives of souls on the planet. Because we on our own, we are quite, I would say, minuscule. We are quite, diminished in our capacity, but we are a part of a larger, bigger picture. And we are a part of a parampara going right up to the Lord. And we can be used. We can be used to do things which are completely unimaginable if you just were to base things on our effort and our capacity. So the whole idea of sadhana is to make ourselves available. How could we make ourselves available? The idea is to make ourselves available. This is surrender. Surrender means to be able to learn to step aside so the guru can use us. so that we don't have an agenda which is going to interfere. And there's an internal state where you allow the Guru to be able to use us. And that comes when we don't have an agenda. And that is also a gift of being able to develop a deeper sense of sambandha. Yeah, in the spiritual sky in Vraja, everybody who is serving the Lord has no other agenda other than wanting to serve Him. Now, in such a circumstance, all kinds of wonderful things happen, all kinds of arrangements are made, and all kinds of wonderful festivals and so many other celebrations are held because everybody is cooperating, because everybody have in their heart the only ideal they have in their heart is wanting to serve. Now, when there is a lack of cooperation, it simply means that people are not making themselves available. That's the whole idea. Yeah. If we internally make ourselves available, Srila Prabhupada will use us. How do you make yourself available internally? There has to be a deeper sense of sambandha. The idea of being available means aligning our plans with Krishna's plans. That is not possible until we give up aparad. What aparad am I referring to? I'm referring to namaparad, because the last offense of namaparad, last namaparad is developing material desires even after hearing thousands of instructions. We hear so many instructions on the topic of having desires which are non-aligned with Krishna's desires, and that is an offense. Until that offense goes away, which is offensive chanting goes away, we cannot be proper instruments. And the whole idea of being an instrument is to give complete control to those who can use us. Give complete control. Step aside, and you will find that a lot of wonderful magic can happen. When is a soul, when is someone in our movement very useful? The extent to which they can step aside is how useful they are to Lord Chaitanya. The extent to which they can step aside is how useful they are. When is it when they can step aside? They can step aside when their own namaprad ends. When the namaprad ends, they can step aside. They will have the ability to step aside so that Lord Chaitanya can use them. So this is a direct consequence of being in touch with spiritual potency, where you basically would have the ability to step aside and say, I cannot do what is expected of me because I'm very minute. So there's humility, and then you step aside, and Lord Chaitanya picks up and says, okay, I can use this person because he is practically stepping aside. He is going to be used as an instrument. This is the whole power. Yeah. So we'll read through these verses, and I want to just touch upon the sound energy, because you can do things with sound which can completely alter the nature of existence of the entire planet, which is the reason why our entire plan is to spread the transcendental names of Krishna. Harinam becomes such an important fact. And Harinam chanters have to be very careful. They have to work on themselves so that their sound energy doesn't interfere, but rather encourages and upgrades the existence of others so they could step aside as well. Now, let's look at verse 22. This is Maitreya Rishi describing to Sri Vidura. I shall therefore describe to you the pastimes by which the personality of Godhead extends his transcendental potency for the creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the cosmic world as they occur one after another. The personality of Godhead, the master of all living entities, existed prior to the creation as one without a second. It is by his will only that creation is made possible, and again everything merges in him. This supreme self is symptomized by different names. So this is actually the first verse of the Chatushloki. The wording is a little different, but the translation, the essence and the meaning are the same almost. The Lord, the undisputed proprietor of everything, was the only seer. The cosmic manifestation was not present at that time, and thus he felt imperfect without his plenary and separated parts and parcels. The material energy was dormant, whereas the internal potency was manifested. The Lord is the seer, and the external energy which is seen works as both cause and effect in the cosmic manifestation. O greatly fortunate Vidura, this external energy is known as Maya or illusion, and through her agency only is the entire material manifestation made possible. We spoke about this in the previous session as Krishna, in his expansion as Karanodakashayi Vishnu, as Lord Narayan, he is practically glancing at dormant matter, and that glance is personified as Lord Shiva, and dormant matter is managed by Lord Shiva and his Shakti Mother Durga. So Krishna, Karunadagashai Vishnu's consort, Sri Rama, she becomes Durga Devi, while the personification of the glands is Lord Shiva. So the entire material manifestation is being managed by Krishna through his expansion of, as Lord Shiva, the Gunavatar of Lord Shiva. The supreme living being in his feature as the transcendental Purusha incarnation, who is the Lord's plenary expansion, impregnates the material nature of three modes, and thus, by the influence of eternal time, living entities appear. So, this impregnation is the glance, because Krishna, in his expansion as Karunadakashai Vishnu, is glancing, and by glancing, he is impregnating. But that glance has the personality. That glance itself is Lord Shiva. So, Lord Shiva is considered the seed giving father. When Krishna describes himself as a seed giving father, he is referring to himself as Lord Shiva. Thereafter, influenced by the interactions of eternal time, the supreme sum total of matter called the Mahatattva became manifested. And in this Mahatattva, the unalloyed goodness, the Supreme Lord, sowed the seeds of universal manifestation out of his own body. Thereafter, the Mahatattva differentiated itself into many different forms as a reservoir of would-be entities. So the Mahatattva, if you want to simply understand it at a very simplistic level, it is you can just say it's like sculpey clay, and sculpey clay is inert, but then if you introduce passion into the sculpey clay, passion will allow differentiated shapes to emerge. So whenever we speak about creation, we speak about passion, and passion is required. Passion is what differentiates. Passion is what creates, a certain shape, because you can see that, when a creation, we look, go by a street, you don't find uniformity, especially in India. You don't find any uniformity in any place, and every house is very distinct, different, and it's quite amazing. So here, what you would notice that whenever there's passion, there would be a differentiation, because there is a certain desire, there's a certain way to do things. So you go with the first primordial matter. First, there is Mahat Tattva, and then the Mahat Tattva, which is predominated by the Lord's potency. There, at that point in time, there is an introduction of passion. When passion is introduced, this whole undifferentiated matter starts taking different shapes and forms, because now passion is there to create, different shapes and forms. This is done by the Lord through his different avatars. This is basically the function of Lord Brahma, is that he is working through the idea of what we would call as creating shapes and forms, because that requires passion. Shapes and forms based on karma and the what is required. There are so many different karmic manifestations. Okay. Now, the next one is, thereafter, the Mahatattva is differentiated itself into many different forms as the reservoir of would-be entities. The Mahatattva is chiefly in the mode of ignorance, and it generates the false ego. It's a plenary expansion of the personality of Godhead with full consciousness of creative principles, and thus time for fructification. Why is the word mode of ignorance being used for the Mahatattva? The reason for the mode of ignorance being used for the Mahatattva is because it creates false ego. When you differentiate and then you give a certain form, the living entity starts assuming that they are that particular form. And because they are different from the form next to them, they say that I'm different and you are different. So the commonality principle is forgotten. So there's a certain false ego. The idea of all beings being connected to the Supreme Lord and being parts and parcels, even though differentiated, doesn't exist because of the false ego. The false ego practically makes people think that once I am a certain way and once I'm different. I'm American. I'm English. I'm Irish, and I'm this and I'm that. There are so many different variegations created by passion, because passion has introduced different shapes and forms, different colors of skin, different, I would say, ethnicities in terms of, eating, sleeping, mating, defending. There are so many different combinations and so on and so forth. And when all of these differentiation happens due to the introduction of passion, there is also false ego, because everybody thinks that I'm this and I'm that and I'm this. I'm a male, I'm a female. There are so many different differentiations that occur because of the introduction of passion. So passion creates differentiation, and it also basically sets the stage for the mode of ignorance to occur, where the false ego fully emerges, and the mind basically says that this is who I am. I'm this body. I'm different. You're different. So this particular statement comes due to the introduction of passion, and due to the introduction of passion, and there's also the what I would call the concept of mode of ignorance, which is the false ego, where the mind basically identifies with the creation instead of identifying with the soul's objectives. Mahat Tattva, or the great causal truth, transforms into false ego, which is manifested in three phases: cause, effect, and doer. All such activities are on the mental plane and are based on the material elements, gross senses, and mental speculation. So, material elements, gross senses, mental speculation. It is all on the mental plane. The false ego is represented in three different modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. The false ego is transformed into the mind by interaction with the mode of goodness. The false ego is transformed into the mind by interaction with the mode of goodness. So the mind practically comes into being in the mode of goodness. Yeah. The mind comes into being in the mode of goodness. It is the mind which is basically creating all kinds of differences. There's always a different level of sankalpa and vikalpa which is occurring in the mind. Sometimes being in England is good, sometimes being in India is good, sometimes being in America is good, sometimes being in India is good. These are all sankalpas and vikalpas created by the mind. It is the mind. It is created, by the false ego in the mode of goodness. So, what is the solution? If something is created in the mode of goodness, you need to resolve it in the mode of goodness. So, if you want to resolve false ego, we have to go to the mode of goodness, which is the primary reason why we are, basically working on ourselves to reach the platform of goodness, so that we could resolve these issues of who am I? Am I this body? Am I this particular entity who is born with this particular identity, or do I have other identities, or am I a servant of Krishna? This resolution occurs in the mode of goodness, because once you come to passion, then there's great attachment to the body. You can't differentiate. It's very difficult. You cannot really discriminate and understand that we are not this body. It is the mode of goodness which allows us to wean ourselves away from the false ego. So that's why we say you have to come to the mode of goodness for you to be able to process the functions of the mind. How do we purify the mind? We have to come to the mode of goodness. If you come to the mode of goodness, then we have an opportunity to resolve false ego. The mind has the ability to discriminate at that point in time with the aid of the intelligence. It has the ability to say that, okay, I'm not this body. It cannot do it in other modes. It can do it in the mode of goodness because it was created then. We can unresolve what requires to be unresolved. Sorry, we can resolve what requires to be resolved at the um, mode of goodness, but in any other mode, the mind is going to be unresolved. It is going to attach itself to the senses, through the body, and whatever else it is looking at, and it's going to engage in the business of either accepting or rejecting material phenomena. Oh, sometimes this is good and sometimes that is bad, accepting, sankalpa. Sometimes there's vikalpa. So there's a back and forth process the mind engages in all the time. And this occurs in the other modes, more specifically in the mode of passion. But in the mode of goodness, we have an ability to resolve the issues of the mind. All the demigods who control the phenomenal world are also products of the same principle, namely the interaction of false ego and the mode of goodness. So, all the demigods are also created due to interaction of the false ego and the mode of goodness. During the process of creation, the demigods come into being during the mode of goodness, in the mode of goodness. The senses are certainly products of the mode of passion in false ego. And therefore, philosophical, speculative knowledge and fruitive activities are predominantly products of the mode of passion. Yeah. The senses are certainly products of the mode of passion. Yeah. The senses basically discriminate, they don't have the ability to basically understand that they are they are basically being attracted to falsehood. The senses don't have the ability. So they're created in the mode of passion. So there's a certain differentiation that occurs in the mode of passion. So someone's body is created in one way, someone else's body is created in another way. The senses basically are attached to what they see, what they perceive. They can't differentiate. So this is done in the mode of passion. So senses themselves are predominantly the mode of passion. The sky is a product of sound, and sound is the transformation of egoistic ignorance. In other words, the sky is a symbolic representation of the Supreme Soul. The sky is a product of sound. Yeah. The sky is a product of sound, and the sound is a transformation of egoistic ignorance. We spoke about it early on in the class that sound is created as a first principle, it is the first element. And sound has the ability to modify everything else because it is the most subtle of every other material element. Sound is produced in the sky. So what does it mean? It basically means that the idea of conception of sound is equal to what we would call as ether. When we use the word sky, we're using the word ether. Yeah, when we say that, okay, we spoke into ether, we spoke into the space, we spoke into ether. This is basically the statement that comes from the fact that the sky produces sound. Yeah. So here in Sanskrit we call it Akash. The tattva itself is called Akash tattva. Sound is the symptom of Akash tattva. That is why all kinds of mantras are the resolution principle for rest of the elements. If you want to control the elements, the 5 different elements that compose the mind, you have to start with sound, which is why the mantras have the ability to resolve challenges of the mind, challenges of the body. They have the ability to resolve issues because they start with sound. So the first principle is Akash Tattva, which is sound. The second principle is Vayu, yeah. And the third principle is Agni. The fourth principle is Jala, and the fifth principle is Prithvi. So these are the 5 different elements. Of these 5 elements, the first element of sound controls and has the ability to modify the rest. This is what was demonstrated in the second canto by Lord Brahma, chanting based on the instructions of Krishna, and him creating a blueprint of the universe based on the instructions, and then everything else is manifest based on that particular blueprint. Thereafter, the personality of God had glanced over the sky, partly mixed with eternal time and external energy, and thus developed the touch sensation, from which the air in the sky was produced. So, the touch sensation is that basically the touch sensation is how you understand the presence of Vayu. We cannot understand the presence of air unless you understand the perception of touch. So if you put your palms together, then there's a cushion of air separating the fingers. There's a cushion of air separating the different organs of the body. There's a cushion of air between the 2 palms, which practically allow for some separation. So the principle of perception of touch comes due to the cushion of air that exists between one sense versus the other. So if you touch something, we are able to feel it because there's a cushion of air. It allows us to feel, it allows us to kind of and have a perception of it. Yeah. You're able to see you're able to feel a certain shape because of Vayu Tattva. Yeah. We're able to feel a certain shape because of Vayu Tattva. You cannot feel mantras. You can only hear them, but then you can feel the sense of touch. And this is created as the next sense. And the sense of touch is basically Vayu Tattva, and it is related to Vayu. It's related to the air in the sky and air in the element of air. Because you can't really touch and you can't really understand what you're touching without the principle of air, Vayu. It allows you to understand have some sense perception. The other understanding is you fill a space in the universe and you're displacing air, and as a consequence, there is Vayu Tattva. Yeah, you also understand that you're displacing a certain volume of air by your body, and that is also how you fill space. So this is also Vayu Tattva. These are two different examples of Vayu Tattva, where Vayu basically is something how you keep in touch with people. Say, for instance, sometimes you use the word that someone is not in touch with reality. What does it mean? It also, Ayurveda says that such a person has issues with wind. They have issues with Vayu. They have issues with this Vayu being displaced because they are not in touch with reality. There are some issues and challenges in them being able to perceive reality. So the whole idea of being in touch with others and being in touch with the universe, filling the space that is being given in the particular universe by being existing with our body here, is all a function of the principle of air, principle of Vayu, principle of Vayu. This is very important for us to understand that this is the second principle, and this is how we perceive things. And this is the second principle that is created by the Lord. Thereafter, the extremely powerful air interacting with the sky generated the form of sense perception and the perception of form transformed into electricity, the light to see the world. So the perception of form transformed into electricity, the light to see the world. Next is the Agni Tattva. This is again due to interactions. The interaction with the sky. Air is interacting with the skies. First, there is sound interacting with the sky, producing air. And then air is interacting with the sky, producing fire, which is Agni. And then that gives us the ability to see. So the previous two situations, you could only hear sound, you could only feel air, and now in this third situation, you're able to see, feel, and also hear. When electricity was surcharged in the air and was glanced over by the Supreme at that time, by a mixture of eternal time and external energy, the, there occurred the creation of water and taste. Now, water allows you to taste, water allows you to see, water allows basically you can see water, you could taste water, you could feel water as well, you could hear water. But can you smell water? The answer is no. You can't really smell water. Water is supposed to be odorless. That is the quality which is missing. The first quality was sound. Okay, that controls our process of hearing. The second quality is air. That controls our process of being in touch with others, being able to feel. The third quality is fire. It allows us to see. The fourth quality is water. It allows us to taste. And each of these qualities successively have the qualities of others embedded in them. Now, the last quality is creation of Prithvi, which is earth, and it is characterized primarily by smell. The transformation that occurs, you can actually smell it. In India, if there's rain, you could actually smell, the wonderful odor that comes due to the rains touching the earth. So you can actually smell earth. So the concept of smelling and having some kind of an odor is the final transformation that occurs. But how do you de-transform and how do you purify all of this? Because everything started with sound, you transform everything else through sound. Sound has the ability to create a certain kind of future. Sound has the ability to modify a certain kind of future as well. O gentle one, of all the physical elements, beginning from the sky down to the earth, all the inferior and superior qualities are due only to the final touch of the glance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The controlling deities of all the above mentioned physical elements are empowered expansions of Lord Vishnu. They are embodied by eternal time under the external energy, and they are his parts and parcels. Because they were entrusted with different functions of universal duties and were unable to perform them, they offered fascinating prayers to the Lord as follows. So, what follows for the rest of the chapter is the prayers offered by the controllers who were designated to manage the universe, but they couldn't. So, because they couldn't perform their function, they are practically offering prayers to the Lord. What has this got to do with being able to engage in transcendental service? The first primary fact of all of these discussions is there has to be an establishment of faith, there has to be an establishment of control. If Krishna controls the creation process, Krishna is controlling maintenance, he's controlling destruction. His agents come and they manage rest of the universe. And his agents themselves are dependent on him for them to be able to perform their function. All of these are simply a foundation of faith that there is a certain cause and there's an effect. And the original cause is the Supreme Lord, the secondary cause are his energies. This understanding in the heart of the devotee is what allows a devotee to process events in life. Please connect all of this to what we spoke about Vidura. When Sri Vidura was thrown out of the assembly, he said this is a function of external energy. External energy is Krishna's energy. So that is the cause. I am experiencing a cause and the effect of the intention of external energy, which is the energy of the Lord. Now, this whole process of reaching that conclusion occurs simply because there is an understanding that every small component of the universe is being managed by the servants of the Lord. That is the reason why there's such detailed knowledge being provided of the elements. In fact, for Srimad Bhagavatam, this is somewhat, I would say, rudimentary because the greater truths of Srimad Bhagavatam are already being discussed. This is more elemental in terms of their discussion. However, there are Puranas and there are other literature in Vedas which practically elaborate to such an extent that it is just fascinating to see the level of detail that's available in terms of who manages what and what is it which is going to control them. So, who is controlling everybody? The controller is the Supreme Lord. And the Supreme Lord, when he appears in the sound manifestation of Harinam, has the ability to transform everything. Krishna comes into the universe. When you call him, when you call upon the Harinam, when you call upon Krishna's names in Harinam, he is manifesting himself. When he is manifesting himself, there's change that occurs. Yeah. There's great change that happens when you call upon Krishna's names. There's great change. What is the change that occurs? It transforms everything because everything starts with sound, everything can be transformed with sound. There is transcendental sound and there's degrading sound. What is created with degrading sound can be realigned and repositioned to serve the Lord with transcendental sound by those who are coming in touch with transcendental sound. But if you understand the details of how deep these connections are in the universe, it gives one a more analytical representation and good faith in the heart of how deeply controlled the universe is, so that we have the ability to constantly remind ourselves to accept each and every moment of our existence as being arranged by Krishna. This is the understanding of Trinadapi Sunichena. Trinadapi Sunichena requires some level of analytical knowledge, which is being provided here, as to how deep Krishna's control is. It also requires bhajan, so that we have the ability to step aside and understand that, yes, Krishna controls each and every aspect of our existence. And we need to accept each and every day as his arrangement. And we need to work towards doing our very best in that particular day. What is going to give us the ability to do it? It is coming in touch with Krishna through his names. This is basically what the devotee has to do. We have to chant so that we have the ability to manage that particular day. We have the ability to manage the day. We have the ability to do our very best so that we can offer the time back to Krishna and we could upgrade the existence of others by involving and absorbing ourselves with transcendental sound. Because with transcendental sound, we have the ability to upgrade the consciousness of others and we have the ability to upgrade the existence of others. With primary material sound, there's a downgrade, there's a degrading. So we need to understand how this works. That's why sound has to be understood as a primary aspect of transformation. The demigods basically are going to offer prayers for rest of the chapter. I would like to do this in the next session because these prayers themselves are simply wonderful. They're just quite elaborate in how they are attributing Krishna's mercy and surrender to Krishna and the existence of connection between Krishna's, the identity, the sambandha between the devotee and Krishna, which practically allows them to manage things. Yeah, that particular aspect is being given here. Why is this important? These are demigods who control the affairs of the universe, and they are not able to perform their function. Now they are understanding that, okay, we can't perform our functions that have been given to us. Who is it who is going to empower us? It is Krishna. So, yes, you have been given a certain position, but you can't really do anything. So, who do you turn to? You turn to Krishna. So, that's what the next few prayers are. But our understanding of this chapter so far should be that it is sound that transforms and it is sound that degrades. So, we need to upgrade our internal perception of sound by calling upon Krishna's names and increasing our sambandha. When we increase our sambandha and namaparat ceases, then we have the ability to transform the hearts of others because our sound vibration would practically go into their ears and would create new plans for them. Yeah. Srila Prabhupada started this movement in Tompkins Park with Kartal and Mridanga with a small group of devotees. It started with sound. This movement in the West started with sound. Then there was this whole kirtan that happened around the world. So it is kirtan which transforms. It is kirtan which is going to transform in the future. This is the reason why Lord Chaitanya led so many kirtan parties. And it was so elaborate. There was such description of kirtan that was given in all the procession in Jagannath Puri, in Mayapur, in the surrounding places. This is how preaching took place. Preaching took place by introducing transcendental sound. And you introduce transcendental sound, and if our sambandha is great, we have the ability to upgrade the hearts of those who are walking along the street. By upgrading their hearts, they have the ability to connect with and move forward. So, this is basically laying out an establishment of ideas on how to begin transformations if you seek to preach. Transformations have to begin with sound energy, but that sound energy has to come from a place of great knowledge. It cannot come from what is already what we would call as being it's mundane. It has to come from a place of great knowledge. It has to come from Srimad Bhagavatam, with a deeper understanding. It has to come from a deeper understanding of Harinam. Yeah. So if one's chanting is very deep, they have the ability to produce sound which is very transformative. So our responsibility is to Srila Prabhupada, our responsibility to Lord Chaitanya is to upgrade our chanting. If we upgrade our chanting, we can become instruments. And this discussion that we have had so far, you can find it in so many different texts in terms of sound being transformed into touch, touch being transformed into sight, and sight being transformed into taste, and taste being transformed into the sense of smell. These five different transformations, you can find it in so many different scriptures. However, what we need to take from this is to have the understanding that we have been given transcendental sound. Many of us have been initiated into transcendental sound. We have received it. Now imagine this. Just imagine this particular phenomenon that Lord Chaitanya initiated Srila Rupa Goswami. Lord Chaitanya initiated Srila Sanatan Goswami. They received sound vibrations into their heart. Those sound vibrations were passed on by them to their disciples. And then the disciples who captured the sound vibration of Srila Rupa and Sanatana, which is Sri Jiva, he passed it on to Narottam Das Thakur. He passed it on to Shyamananda Prabhu. He passed it on to Srinivasacharya. They distributed it in different parts of Gauda Desha. They distributed it in different parts of Odisha. And then finally, it has reached us from Srila Prabhupada to our gurus, if you're second generation, and then we are here receiving the same sound vibration which emanated from the lotus mouth of Lord Chaitanya. Now that exists in our heart. And because we all carry Lord Chaitanya in our heart, we have the ability to understand that he is going to impel us to basically distribute Harinam. Yeah, this is basically what it is. It's a very, very powerful system. The more we connect back to our parampara, the greater would be our ability to transform others. And we would have the ability to upgrade, we will have the ability to upgrade consciousness by introducing sound. So we are actually, we are do that properly. It is to do their bhajan properly, because then they can be instruments in the hands of Lord Chaitanya. They have been given the sound emanated from Lord Chaitanya's lotus mouth. We are hearing the sound emanated from the lotus mouth of Lord Nityananda. We have been given the sound that has been emanated from the lotus mouth of Srila Haridas Thakur, the Namacharya, from Srila Jiva Goswami, from Rupa, Sanatana, all the six different acharyas, and so many different personalities, including our own Srila Prabhupada. We are recipients of that sound vibration into our hearts. We have great responsibility in ensuring that we modify, we cultivate, and we basically modify our own transformation. We basically modify our existence, we transform ourselves, and then we redistribute the sound as purely as it was given to us to the souls of the world and upgrading their consciousness. So if you want to take any understanding from the few verses that we have read so far, which are quite complex in their in their script, in terms of what it was that sound created uh, air, and air created fire, fire created water, water created earth, and then each and every time this was created, there were transformations that were occurring. Yeah, but it all started with sound. So we should take that message into our hearts. So I'm going to stop here and see if you have any questions. Then we will finish the prayers offered by the demigods to Krishna in the next chapter, next session. Yeah. So we have a few verses. I would like to dedicate one session for that purpose.
Hare
Any
Krishna,
question,
Prabhu.
comment? Haribol.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you for wonderful class. You brought up some very important points and really interesting to hear these points. I was just reading a bit about what was mentioned in the verses about compassion. Now, if you relate the idea of compassion in this world today, or the idea of even evolution, we hear about the Darwinian version of evolution, that idea of survival of the fittest, but that's only a half truth. And actually, if we look at the idea of evolution, the most evolved beings are those that are truly compassionate in nature. But unfortunately, in this world, we have a mundane understanding of compassion in terms of philanthropy and things to do with philanthropy. But this idea of evolution, that survival of the fittest, has caused all manner of chaos. This Darwinian idea in education systems, and getting people to understand this, become survival of the fittest in the corporate world, and dog eat dog world. But actually, truly evolved people are those that are truly compassionate, and yet that understanding, that basic understanding, is missing in the corporate structures of this world. So my question is, I'd like to ask this question: why is the mundane ideas of compassion popularized to the masses at the expense of true compassion and understanding of true compassion, as mentioned in the Bhaktivedanta scriptures?
Okay, so I think actually very good points. In reality, the material existence, the material world, when I'm referring to the participants in material structures, participants in, for example, in the financial markets, participants everywhere, they all come to deep conclusions whenever there are massive losses. When there's great destruction is when people wake up. And this happened back in 2008, 2009. Now, if you understand how modern day economic theory has evolved, modern day economic theory has evolved from the writings and the postulates of Adam Smith, who basically wrote, I guess, in England, and he was from Scotland. And then this was exported to America. And Adam Smith was quite dysfunctional in his day-to-day activities. And it was said that he had issues with mental health, where he used to wander away in the night. He used to be brought back. But then his writings are the bedrock or the foundation, and they are the bedrock and they are the foundation for modern economic theory. And I'm saying modern economic theory because uh, everything revolves around the idea of money. And so as a consequence, if someone could be dysfunctional a few centuries back, and they could produce literature, and then that literature and that person becomes the guru of everybody else. And I'm saying this because his birthday is celebrated every year in some place in Scotland, which he was, he was from Scotland. And you have the chairman of the Federal Reserve from America. You have, the governors of the Bank of England and the European banks. They all come and they convene as if, like we go for our Samadhi retreats, in terms of trying to celebrate the existence of a saint. They all convene there because just to celebrate his idea. However, back in 2008 and 2009, his ideas were completely put to test. And what was the fundamental, foundational idea that he had put into the hearts of people? He said that if you create an environment, if you create a certain system which encourages people to pursue their selfish interests, that in turn would also benefit society as a whole. So the whole premise of the foundation of all modern economic theory and everything else is selfishness. And that is why that idea caught on and became one of the bedrock foundational theories of capitalism, where if you encourage people in their selfishness, then they would become more useful to society, where you could set up certain rules on how they're supposed to operate, and then they would start contributing to rest of society because they would pursue their own selfish goals, and as a consequence, the whole rest of society would um, flourish because of it. This theory was debunked, or I would say everybody kind of looked at each other and said, oh, this was completely wrong. And this happened in 2008, 2009, because everybody got quite selfish and they almost destroyed the world financial system. So people wake up in the material world when they go through great agony because they have to find the systems being destroyed, which is exactly the second verse of the Chatushloki given in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Yeah, it is said very clearly that if something is not connected to me, this is Lord Narayan saying this in the second verse of the Chatushloki. If something is not connected to me, know that it is certain to be destroyed. Yeah, it is basically not going to exist. It is a part of the material realm which goes through the transformation of destruction. Yeah, this is basically so spoken in the Chatushloki. If it is not connected to him, they are participating in activities which are surely going to be destroyed. But the point which you're trying to make here is why is it that it is so famous is because the consciousness that is prevalent in society helps or makes people gravitate towards a certain philosophy. They gravitate towards a certain kind of approach to life. They gravitate towards an institution. So if you set up an institution such as ISKCON and say that these are the principles that we're going to be governed by, and the objective of ISKCON is to basically transform ourselves so that we could go back to Godhead, because that's who we are, then it attracts a certain kind of entity, a certain kind of soul who comes in touch with this institution. Institutions are living entities. The banks, the economic powerhouses, the various corporations, they're all in a certain way a living entity, if you were to look at them. And based on the governing principle, they attract people. And then they also get destroyed if they're going to function based on the material principle of selfishness, which is what we noticed in 2008, 2009. We noticed in recent times as well that they all go belly up. And even if you call an organization as a going concern, it never exists beyond a certain period of time simply because they are functioning within the paradigm of selfishness. But if you create an institution such as ISKCON, for instance, for furthering spiritual knowledge and for taking people back home, then you have a certain kind of people coming in into our temples because your temple has a certain goal, and the goal attracts a certain entity. And each and every institution has its goals, and the goals themselves attract a certain kind of entity. So, to answer your question, we really have institutions created for the purpose of passion and ignorance. As a consequence, there are different souls who basically go towards those institutions because they're also in passion and ignorance. What is being promoted is what is prevalent. What is being promoted is what is prevalent in the hearts of the living entities at this time. Yeah, this is basically what it is. What is prevalent is passion and ignorance, and as a consequence, you find it extraordinarily powerfully manifesting itself. But then our little institution, you may not have many devotees. So I was just wanting to distinguish the fact that if there's passion and ignorance in the hearts of the living entities, they would choose a certain kind of leader. They will gravitate towards a certain kind of institution. They would gravitate towards a certain function. They'll be attracted to a certain philosophy, which is quite downgrading. All of this is because there's an issue with consciousness. So our business, after recognizing that there's an issue with consciousness, which practically manifests all of this, our business is to ensure that we introduce principles into this particular universe, which can kind of de-seat this conception, and that is done through sound. Does it make sense? And just what I'm trying to say is, our business is basically to say that because you have created all this nonsense because of consciousness, we're going to introduce sound, which is going to practically go into your hearts, and you're going to create fresh plans that are in alignment with Krishna's plans. So that's why sound and the distribution of Harinam becomes super important. I hope this answered your question. It was a little bit extended, more
No,
elaborate
no,
than I intended to be.
thank you. Wonderful. Just a mention on that then. If see this process is actually a descending process, and it's actually very easy to understand, seeing that it's descending. It's giving information about absolute truth as opposed to trying to search for truth, which is what science is trying to do. And yet, the comprehension of that simple understanding that this is bringing happiness to these people appears missing, and yet it's such a simple thing that can be implemented to create such a wonderful change in the world very quickly. Also, it's questionable why this is not um, um, reaching to those people who can actually, I don't know, make a change in the world, or add additional understandings in education systems.
Sure.
It's not clear why why 90% of the masses have to suffer and 10% enjoy, when actually the whole world can prosper very quickly. It can be
Sure.
flipped around very quickly. So just what, if you could comment on those points, please.
Sure, please. Actually, I was wanting to just mention in 500 years back, when Lord Chaitanya commissioned Lord Nityananda to spread the mission, Lord Nityananda went door to door in Navadvip. It was not in the West. It was in a place which was steeped in the culture of Harinam. It was steeped in the culture of Vedic science. He went door to door with Srila Haridas Thakur, knocking on each and every door, wanting to distribute Harinam. There were many doors that were slammed shut in the face of Lord Nityananda. He used to cry that they are not accepting what he is there to distribute freely. What I'm trying to say is that um, Krishna, 5,000 years back, when he appeared, he was there in front of people, and there were many who rejected him. They couldn't even accept him as an important personality. They couldn't even accept him as someone who was powerful. There were many who practically, most rejected him. There were only a few who could accept him. So that's why we had two different divisions of the Kurukshetra war, of one group which was not very good in understanding who he was, and the other group which had the ability to say that regardless of what the outcomes are, I just want to be with him and I want to follow his instructions. The Lord gives us free will. What we are seeing in this world today is a broken down system, and this broken down system has existed for several centuries, where the complexity of material energy has just caught on, where people who have come here, the souls that are coming here, are not finding it easy to depart, and that's why the population is increasing. They're constantly coming back, and newer souls are coming in, and then you're not able to kind of take them away from their existence that we have here. But what I was wanting to say is the Lord allows for free will. And even if the Lord distributed himself, Lord Nityananda himself distributed Harinam, there were those who shut the door in his face. But our attempt has to be to do what Srila Prabhupada did. Our attempt has to be to do what we can do to distribute it to as many people as possible. Throw the net as widely as possible. Throw the net as widely as possible. Go to different places and throw the net as widely as possible to capture as many souls as possible. This is basically what our attempt has to be, which is what Srila Prabhupada did, which is what Lord Chaitanya did, which is what Lord Nityananda did. And even in those circumstances, you had people come and leave, or you had people basically shut their door in the face of the Lord. All of this happened in the past centuries. So what I'm saying is that what is happening right now is not surprising. But to answer your question as to why can't we implement something where we just take everybody en masse, that would not be fair on those who are trying. So it's like a classroom where Krishna doesn't discriminate. But then in a classroom, if a student really works very, very hard, and then they want to basically, you need to basically set up a system of recognition that someone is working hard, and you applaud them, and then you give them an ability to move forward as well. But there could be students in the same classroom who have been given the same opportunity as the one who is working very, very hard, who put minimal effort or probably even do the opposite of what is required. And to give them the same results as the one who is working very, very hard would kind of challenge the system. So our system is very powerful. We don't discriminate how and where Harinam is being distributed. We don't discriminate where Prasadam is being distributed. But for those of us who have come in to stay aligned with the movement, there is a need for us to do what is required of by the Lord. So basically, the rules begin after entry. There are no rules for participating in this movement. The rules begin after entry, but the opportunity is equal. But the Lord's plan is that over a period of time, they would take as many souls as possible to back to Godhead, which is what the plan is. And that's why we distribute Harinam. We sometimes find them accepting it, sometimes they reject it, but we know that they come for a couple of days of seva at the temple. So we strategize in such a way that they're able to do some menial seva. We strategize in such a way that they're able to hear Harinam, they're able to eat Krishna Prasadam. Even if they leave after 2 days and they don't come to the temple for the rest of their lives, the process has begun. See, that's our glorious process. The process has begun. They will be drawn again into the movement at some future point, and which is basically quite insignificant if you were to take eternal time into account. They will be drawn again because the movement has already moved and it has already kind of given them what they have to be receiving in this lifetime. If they haven't been able to grab it, they will come back again. So that understanding is also very firm. So I was wanting to say that Krishna allows free will, and this phenomenon rejecting Krishna is happened even 500 years back. It happened 5,000 years back, and bad behavior cannot be rewarded. There has to be an opportunity given to everyone, but at the same time, there has to be a system which allows only the most qualified to go beyond a certain point. It's like saying that if you want to come into a PhD program, your work has to be equal to the PhD program. If the work is equal to grade school, even though you have bought into the PhD program and you have the ability to upgrade and so on, you don't do it, then basically, the system basically closes down. So the system that we have is quite efficient. We bring a lot of people in, and quite natural that many leave. Many leave simply because the process of weeding that occurs is also very natural. They don't basically leave because there's a lack of opportunity. They leave because in this particular lifetime, they're not be able to do what is required next. So your thought process of wanting to be compassionate is absolutely required. And the desire to take back the whole world is absolutely required. This is all very much in line with Vaishnava thought process. But I was only wanting to categorize it and to give you a sense that even in the history, even in history, when the world's population was not so degraded, Krishna was rejected. I was just wanting to give you that sense. That's all.
Thank you, Prabhu. Wonderful points. Thank you very much.
Sure. Any other question or comment?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. It's
Hari
so
Prabhu.
wonderful glorification of Harinam. It's really giving a lot of hope, and it's so wonderful. Thank you, Prabhu, as always. Prabhu, I wanted to ask you, just now you mentioned most of the people leave. That's because of the weed. I just wanted to ask you, Prabhu, can it be due that they don't have that much security and they don't receive the mercy? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure.
Maybe that's the reason. Thank you. Prabhu.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. When we engage in spiritual activity, let's say someone comes into a temple and then we tell them that I need some help. Could you sweep the temple floor? Or I need some help. Could you help me with book distribution where you could carry the boxes and I could do this, etc. What does happen is that they develop spiritual credits. Some of us have come from the previous lifetime where we've already done a lot of service, and there's been a lot of sadhana that's already been done. There's already been a lot of advancement that has been experienced from the past. In this lifetime, this whole journey between receiving faith to reaching, Ado Shraddha to Anartha Nivritti is very short for many of us. Yeah. So you find that some devotees, they just take off because they already have reached a certain degree of progress from the previous lifetime. They go through some life experiences so that they could become more focused. and then they give up certain subtle attachments that they can't really figure out, and then they take up what has to be taken up, and then they just take off. This is one category. There's another category where they're just coming into the movement for the very first time because of the mercy of Lord Nityananda. So the net has been thrown so far and wide by the mercy of Lord Nityananda that we are picking up souls who probably wouldn't have come in touch with anything connected to transcendence in the previous lifetime. So we're picking up so far and wide. Now, in such circumstances, because they do not have much spiritual credit, a compensation for such is being provided by Srila Prabhupada. So then what is required for them to do is to just be aligned with what is being done in the environment and to be faithful and to be chaste to Srila Prabhupada. And then the compensation for what is lacking is being provided by Srila Prabhupada. You see, because if spiritual credits are not present, then one doesn't have the ability to move forward. Mercy is to receive spiritual credits in lieu of what was not done in the past. And as a consequence, Srila Prabhupada does that for us, which is how he has compensated us so that we could do our part, even though we may not have come with a lot into this world. And in some cases, what does happen is that when they come and they receive the spiritual credit, they don't take advantage. This is like the example of the bad student who is playing truant. He skips classes, he goes away, he probably watches the movies, he engages in all kinds of mischief, even when there's an opportunity given for him to upgrade himself in the classroom. So they don't take advantage of what's being given, and they do what they can to some minimal extent. Yeah. And that minimal extent is carried over to the next lifetime. So the good thing is that they have already kind of made some progress and they carry over the next lifetime. So some souls, they just can come and initiate the process in this lifetime. And some souls can come, initiate the process, and go further along. Some souls have already reached good heights and they've come into this life and they're trying to basically complete the process in this lifetime. So, in a real temple room, or in a community of devotees around the world, you will find all these different categories of souls of different gradations who have come into the movement. So, we should expect that. How do we inspire all of these? This is basically the responsibility of leadership, because collective inspiration is arranged by leadership. The leadership in any yatra has to ensure that they're able to sustain different levels. Yeah. Be very compassionate to those who basically are starting out. Yeah. Give them opportunities. Be very compassionate in understanding that they may not be able to do much, but yet what they do is also a great gift for them. So encourage them at whatever level we can. Yeah. Do not make them feel as if they have been deprived. Do not make them feel as if they are, you don't belong here, because you're not really making any progress. But at the same time, ensure that they're encouraged at whatever level they are to contribute. Yeah. And then move forward. There was this example which was given long back. There used to be one devotee in the Second Avenue Yatra when Srila Prabhupada was there. He was quite eccentric. And what he used to do was he used to generally not know how to sit and how to kind of, fit into the crowd when the classes are going on, etc., and so on and so forth. And one day when Srila Prabhupada was giving class, he interrupted the class, but he walked in, and then he walked in with several rolls of toilet paper for the toilet. That motivation for service came because of coming in touch with Srila Prabhupada. Now, that service itself was appreciated because Srila Prabhupada said, yes, that's fine, because, even though he can't really be on par with what we expect him to be, still the motivation for serving Krishna is there, and he is acting on that service. So we encourage him at that level, you see. So he brought, the rolls of toilet paper, things which are quite insignificant from the larger context of things, but then it was wonderful. Yeah. So the point which I'm just trying to make is that there has to be an appreciation of the fact that there are different levels of Sukriti, different levels of consciousness. Not everybody is on the same level. And then to create an environment where everybody thrives is the responsibility of leadership. It is collective consciousness is the responsibility of leadership, where you need to strategize to ensure that you have everybody in that particular group enthused at their levels. Now, someone could just come and have prasadam, so be it, because they're participating in devotional service. Someone could just come for the kirtan and they could just leave, so be it. Yeah. There was this example of Kushakrata Prabhu. I love his translations of the Sandarbhas. He translated so many books after Srila Prabhupada's departure. and he translated so wonderfully. His language and his rendition are very easy to read, and it's very clear. The thought process is very clear. Now, Kushakrata Prabhu was quite difficult to understand even as a child. He was picked upon in Brooklyn. This is the story given by his classmates, who also became devotees. Brooklyn received a lot of devotees, I guess. Dhanodha Maharaj is from Brooklyn. There's so many wonderful devotees from Brooklyn. And basically, he was basically in Brooklyn, and he was quite, I would say, in the general definition of devotee behavior, he stood out. What he used to do was he used to basically, I think this was in the Boston temple with Satsarup Maharaj and others, Giriraj Maharaj. And Giriraj Maharaj basically gave this, he was talking about it, about Kushakrata Prabhu. Kushakrata was born in Brooklyn, but he moved to, I think, Boston and came in touch. He used to sit on the doorway, and the the doorway, and he used to extend his legs. You had to kind of jump over him to get into the temple. And he used to continuously read, and then he used to come and have prasadam. So devotees in the temple, they felt that this is inappropriate, because he's not serving, he's not cooperating. All he does is just read and eat prasadam. So they all wrote to Srila Prabhupada, and he was a brahmachari then. His name was Peter something. I don't remember the last name. He was Italian. I think he was Jewish Italian or something. Anyway, the point is that they said that this bhakta is sitting there. He extends his leg. He doesn't allow anybody to come in. And then, in the sense that he doesn't prevent people from coming in, but then he's extending his leg. So it becomes an obstacle. All he does is just he reads your books, and then he eats prasadam. They all wrote to Srila Prabhupada saying, what could we do with him? We don't know what to do with him. Then Srila Prabhupada wrote back saying, what's your problem? you know, what's your problem? What if he just sits, reads my books, and eats prasadam? That particular personality who sat and who was considered to be dysfunctional, not very useful during those times to the yatra, not very useful to the community, became a translator of transcendental literature, which is very cogent. If you read his books, you will see the clarity. He kind of translated Upanishads, he translated Srila Jiva Goswami's works. There will be a lot of clarity in his writings, and it'll be very easy to read. You can almost very easily read his work compared to others who have written and translated. So the point is, it's very difficult for us to understand who is around us and how functional they are from a movement perspective, whether they are useful from the perspective of book distribution in the temple, bringing Lakshmi, or useful in terms of many other things which people consider as important. But to encourage such devotees as well is the responsibility of leadership, because that's an opportunity. That's basically how Lord Chaitanya's movement is going to be. It is going to be those who are coming for the first time. It's going to be those who have the ability to push forward because they carry some sukriti from their activities, even from other religions. They could have been Christian missionaries who are dedicating themselves and who are wanting to know God in the previous lifetime. In this lifetime, because of the desire of wanting to know more, they have come into a movement. They come with a lot of ability to perform austerities. They come with a lot of ability to perform sankirtan, so on and so forth, because they already have that mood from the previous lifetime of going from place to place. And there's also a lot of blessings because they have done what one will call mode of goodness activities. Yeah. So we have many of those as well in our movement who have come from different religions, who have been practicing those religions with very deep desire to know Krishna, but not necessarily having the ability to do so, being in an environment to do so. And now they are a part of our movement. Yeah. And then they basically are contributing. So there are so many different complex, I would say, past situations that we see in our movement. That is just fascinating to see all of them come and be a part of our Sangha. To encourage everybody is the challenge of leadership. This is a real challenge. It is not an easy thing to do, but to have that ability to kind of take someone and say, okay, I can use you here, I can use you here, in the sense that you will be useful to Krishna here, you will be useful to Krishna here. We don't mind if you just come and eat prasadam and go. We don't mind if you just come and then, do here some kirtan, eat some prasadam and go. We just don't mind any of this. So there's a little bit of understanding that has to come because these are different levels. I was just wanting to say that it plays a role.
Yeah,
Any
thank you
other
very much.
question or comment?
Thanks a lot. It helps. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, can you just mention this? You mentioned Kushakrita Prabhu. Can you just
Yes.
spell his name? It'd be interesting to
It's
find some writings.
yeah, sure. It's Kusha, Kusha, Kratha, Prabhu, Kushakrita Das. He left his body, and when he left his body, he did not have a single penny to his name, and he forbade all the devotees to not sell his books. So he was a very, very unusual soul who spent his entire life translating. He's a Prabhupada disciple, so very wonderful. You can search for him on Google, and you'll find a picture which also kind of demonstrates his mood. quite
Okay.
interesting.
Mhm. Just like to ask you another question, if that's okay, Paul.
Yes, please. Mm-hmm.
You talked about the enthusing of devotees. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations where there are sangha programs, and sometimes it happens that you'll have devotees doing the same thing again and again and again in terms of duties and stuff. But then sometimes it feels to those that attend that they're not capable or doing anything, not interested. But we're looking at if we look at what situation in the early uh, early start of ISKCON and everything, Prabhupada would enthuse everybody in some way to get involved and get engaged by giving them some aspect of service. Now, if in these Sangha programs some aspect of service is not distributed or how can I say um, nurtured to somebody else, how can then this be passed on? Because sometimes even in Sangha programs there's absence of devotees, so when those devotees that were coming but were not given any sort of giving some idea of what to do, it becomes their responsibility, and unfortunately they cannot take on certain services. So I mean, sometimes it could be the case where there could be skillful activities, menial activities, and there could be actually creative activities. And unfortunately, sometimes what happens is only the creative activities are taken, when actually both type of activities should also be taken on board by every devotee, sort of thing. It should be sort of like a situation where not skillful, but creative activity go hand in hand with menial activity. But sometimes what we see is only creative activities being taken on board at the expense of menial activity. Well, where menial activities are put to one side for only certain people to do, and they do that all the time, in fact, and then unfortunately it doesn't get recognized.
Sure. I
And
get your point.
yeah. So what were your thoughts about that?
That's an issue that practically every yatra faces. That in terms of seva, they would face challenges with people wanting a certain kind of seva which inspires them versus not wanting to do other seva. And in some cases, it could be genuine where they can't really do it. In some cases, they just don't have an interest, and so on. This is more of a management and inspirational challenge which is faced by practically every yatra. How do you do it? How do you move from this stage? Is for leadership themselves to participate in the menial seva, and this way, then one could appreciate the need for menial seva. It's actually very, very powerful to be able to clean Krishna's temple, and that seva is one of the best sevas one could ever imagine. Cleaning pots and cleaning temple is one of the best sevas one could imagine. But it is a matter of the leadership themselves trying to figure this out, because it's a complex situation practically with every yatra possible, everyone. Yeah, they have to figure out how to enthuse and inspire others so that they could also participate in this. There are devotees who do enormous amount of physical seva, and there are devotees who cannot do physical seva. There are devotees who won't do physical seva. So the different categories of challenges which the management team faces. But the situation is that they need to enthuse them by participating in that seva, kind of making it their agenda as well.
Yeah, because the point I'm trying to get to is this: that if someone's doing menial seva all the time, it could create burnout in a person. That's why
True.
cyclical, rotas and things, because there's heavy activity sometimes. Washing the pots. If women are doing those kind of activities, whereas the Prabhus are sitting there doing kirtan, and it's actually lots of pot washing in the kitchen being done by Matajis. It brings the question of what's actually going on. So
True.
there has to be a practical element in terms of that as well. But also then there also has to be the practical element that if I'm just doing menial service all the time, where there's a time when there's absence of other devotees doing their services, it wouldn't be possible for that person to then step into those creative services, for example. And those creative services, yes, they may have certain elements which you need to understand. So there has to be a balance between the two. I'm thinking.
The appreciation part is not necessarily a challenge, because Krishna will appreciate and he would give them opportunities. The appreciation is not a challenge within the movement, because they're working for the Lord. So that is not particularly a challenge that I would try and resolve. But what I would definitely say is that if it is a question of time, labor, and effort, and people being overwhelmed with that definitely is something that needs consideration. Yeah, that definitely needs some consideration, because one of the last snares of Maya, as we progress further in consciousness, is that when we are situated in the higher levels of mode of goodness, a need for appreciation will remain. It's one of the last issues one has to resolve. So a need for appreciation will remain even when one makes advancement in every other way you can imagine. And that is something which devotees have to work towards at a later date, as they progress. So appreciation has to be there to give them a push in the right direction. But then what I'm saying is, I think the greater consideration is to have some kind of a balance. Yeah, I completely get that, because I've seen it oftentimes. Is there any other question that I could address? Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Sorry, did you want to say anything? Sorry.
No, I just want to say thank you. Thank you. So wonderful points there. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other question?
Hare Krishna,
Yes,
Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Sorry, Prabhu, you can go ahead.
Why don't you finish, Mataji, then I can talk to Ravindra after you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Go
thank you,
ahead.
Prabhu. And with Pranam, Prabhuji.
So I will come to you, Ravi. I'll come to you. I'll come to you in a moment, Ravi. Yeah.
No problem.
Okay.
So Prabhuji.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, as you explained that in one of the verses it says the false ego is transformed into mind by interaction with the mode of goodness. So here I'm trying to understand is that the mode of goodness will overrule the false ego. But how, like there are sometimes we get hit by when we get hit by any kind of material challenge, and when it hits us at that point, I'm just talking about myself, not the devotees, all the devotees, but at that point then there's this anxiety that comes into play, and at that point mode of goodness is not prevalent, and mode of passion comes into role. So can you like explain like the process, how to get into the mode of goodness at that point of time, to remind the mind and keep poise and go into the mode of goodness, so that we can overcome and keep balance in our, and keep our spiritual life as the priority, and not get into that mode of passion.
Yes. See, this is not an overnight switch, which means we can't switch consciousness by turning on and turning off, like we do a switch. We can't do that. So what is required is that one has to strategize for goodness throughout their lives. We have to position ourselves to participate in how to eat, sleep, defend, and if mating is a part of whatever the ashram is, and if it is permissible and if it is appropriate, then that also gets included. So the whole idea of eating, mating, sleeping, defending as a strategy, we will have to think about it from the perspective of the mode of goodness. We have to position ourselves. What is it which causes passion? Passion is caused by a need to resolve very complex lifestyles. So the first thing a devotee has to do, they have to meditate and understand that there's a goal that I want to pursue. So let them write the goal down. The goal itself is wanting to pursue and go very deep into Krishna consciousness, and wanting to develop prema, which is to fall in love with Krishna, which requires understanding who we are, understanding Krishna, etc. Now, if this goal is written down, then we'll have to work backwards to see what is it which is going to allow me to be functional in this role, in this goal, to achieve this goal fully. Then we will understand that we don't want to be distracted by too many complexities, because we want to remain in a state where we are able to focus on this goal, which is the mode of goodness. If life becomes complex, then it is going to take passion to resolve, which is a fact of life. If we have a very complex lifestyle, when I'm talking about complex, I'm talking about perhaps many responsibilities for the person to execute, because they have created infrastructure which requires maintenance, which means they got to be employed in a certain complex situation. They have to involve themselves in managing it. They have to worry about how much money is coming in, how much money is going out, and doing all of this. All of this requires passion. Then it becomes a bit of a downgrade, because overall our life is situated in passion, because our life has become very complicated. Krishna consciousness is very simple. The issue is that life is very complicated for many devotees. Now, having this understanding, one of the things that we must do is write down what is the goal that we want to achieve. And then we want to kind of also focus on the goal and say that I want to simplify, so that I do not need to get into complex circumstances of life, which can take me away from this particular goal and make it very distracting. So we start making arrangements in such a way that we don't have to worry so much in many different ways. So I'm giving a general answer to this. That's the first point. Now, if there are complex situations that come about when you're strategizing like this, and you're trying to modify your life, and you're trying to maintain the mode of goodness by habits, eating, etc., ensuring that only prasadam is being taken, ensuring that there's a certain lifestyle which allows us to eat and sleep so that we could wake up for japa. If you do all of this, then there will come a day when, because of being a part of material energy, where there can be some serious complexity. When there is a serious complexity that comes when we've already made the arrangements, then we can start focusing on the goal and say that, okay, my idea is to pursue the goal which has been given to me in Krishna consciousness. But now I'm faced with this complexity. This complexity itself is a part of my karma. But Krishna, if it is not useful for the goal, why would you have made me go through this? So we kind of accept the complexity as Krishna's arrangement. When you accept the complexity as Krishna's arrangement, even though it's a struggle temporarily for that particular moment of time, maybe those days, months, years, even, where there's a struggle, when we accept each and every day saying, Krishna, you have arranged this because you want to bring me closer, because my goal was to attain you, then we will find that solutions are coming which we are able to adopt and reach our goal in a very smooth way. Krishna starts intervening in our life, and we are able to move forward. So the point I'm trying to make is that there has to be a broader approach to life to be in the mode of goodness. Then when a complexity of this kind comes, we have the ability to surrender to Krishna, just as Sri Vidura did, where he said that this is your work. This is the external energy. She has arranged it. She is your servant. So I'm just going to accept it as your arrangement. So the goal has to be set first, and life has to be focused upon to make changes in life so that we can reach that goal. And then that day comes when it is very complex. We will have the ability to understand that even that is an arrangement of the Lord so that we could move forward. Even if it is not an arrangement of the Lord, even if you're going through a karma, it will become an arrangement of the Lord if you accept it as an arrangement of the Lord, which is the teaching of the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita. I hope this makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Very nice explanation.
Sure.
Hari.
Now, Hare Krishna. Ravi, could you finish? Then I'll take some questions that are
Yes.
on chat.
Yeah.
Yes.
My question
Please go
is,
ahead.
you said that material sound leads to degradation. So most of the
Mhm.
time, we will be listening consciously or unconsciously, like willingly or not around, because with family, everyone TV, the happening and news, this and that, talking to friends, and office also, so many meetings. Most of the time, like on an average 12 to 14 hours a day, it goes in material, listening to material sound. So how can we save ourselves from,
Yeah, I
because
think
we can't avoid
yeah, it's a good
this.
practical. It's a good question. It's a good practical question. I answered this partially when I was answering the previous question. You will have to have a goal. If you have a goal of wanting to attain Krishna Prema and you're progressing towards attaining Krishna Prema and you're moving your life towards the mode of goodness as much as you can, making it less complex, etc., then you're going to work is also to make enough money so that you could unplug from the material world at an early stage. Yeah, we could think of it that way, in the sense we could go to work because we don't have to worry about money, and then we tolerate the circumstances at work, understanding that is not our main goal. Our goal is to basically function in Krishna Prema, and then we come back and continue our sadhana. If you notice, Lord Brahma, his activity of creating the universe is extraordinarily complex, and you can get very deeply enmeshed if you don't have a proper goal. So that's why he first chanted and he became transcendently situated. But for him to chant and for him to receive enthusiasm, he had to be in the mode of goodness. And then he chanted and he understood what Krishna's plan was, and then he aligned himself with Krishna's plan so that whatever he did on a day-to-day basis didn't affect him in terms of overwhelming him. Because the amount of creative activity which he does, and so many different levels of creation, which are sometimes even in the mode of ignorance, he does, is just too complex, but he's not affected by it because he is practically following the orders of the Lord. So, in a similar fashion, what we need to take from that particular situation is we need to set a goal for us to be able to serve. And once we have set the goal and we're progressing towards a larger, big picture goal, then the activity to reach that goal can be simplified and we can start looking to see how we can make improvements. And during that particular time, when we are making improvements while keeping the big goal in mind, even if you're assaulted by the sound energy of the organization that we work in, the sound energy and the ideas and the plans of close relatives who don't cooperate with us or don't have the same kind of goal, we will have a very good chance of being able to create a future because we are constantly focusing and desiring a future which involves deeper Krishna consciousness. So what I'm saying is our karma puts us in touch with degrading energy and degrading sound. Our desires can pull us out. Yeah, our desires can pull us out. Karma basically has put us into it, but our desires can pull us out. So we need to desire on the basis of Krishna consciousness as well. We need to desire in such a way that even though our karma is complex, Krishna can pull us out because we have proper desires. I hope this makes sense. Until then, we tolerate the circumstances. You need to remember
Yes,
what
Prabhu.
Lord Brahma did. Yeah, we need to remember what Lord Brahma did. His activity in the universe is incomparable. The amount of creativity that he does and the amount of involvement in material energy that he has you can't compare it with what we do. but yet he doesn't get affected because he's following through with Krishna's plan. He has a big picture. So we need to have a big picture. We tolerate the circumstances of the present, and then we strategize to make our life simpler so we would be able to protect ourselves. And while we are tolerating, we remember the goal and not plug in to what is being presented by material energy. That's what we need to do. Now, let's just ensure
Yeah,
that
that
we
is
can
very
just get.
helpful.
Sure, sure, Ravi. Thank you. Now, let's see. I had a couple of questions here on chat. I just want to take that. Um, what is the impetus to continue in material life when the message of transcendence keeps going deep into one's heart? The more we read and hear, in one sense, we are dovetailing everything in Krishna's service, but it feels that it is not enough. Um, we want to accept that what is being given to us that includes this body is Krishna's arrangement for us to come closer. So that includes the present arrangement. It includes the family. It includes the environment. It includes everybody around us. All of this is the arrangement. So we tolerate the circumstances and we do our very best under the circumstances that have been arranged. This is Trinadapi Sunichena Tarori Vasaishnuna. And you have to understand that the circumstance that we are in, that includes family, that includes the environment, that includes the complexities, economic, health, etc. All of these are classrooms that would allow us to remove very subtle attachment that we can't even perceive, which is an obstacle. So as we process life around us while dovetailing our life to Krishna's service, we will also be able to give up subtle attachments that we don't even perceive that exists while we try to push it away and try to tolerate and follow Krishna's plan. So that's what the purpose is. We are in a classroom so that we could shed the problems and the attitudes that we have. And the more complex the classroom, the greater the ability of the person to kind of fight it out and still stay focused, the greater would be the reward, because you can then have a laser-like focus because everything else is falling apart. Now, second question, can you also let me know if there's any book specific to understand about Vaishnava etiquette? I mean, there have been many books on Vaishnava etiquette which have been authored, but I think what is more powerful is to see Vaishnava etiquette in action. So you could read the Leelamrita, you could read Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, and the Chaitanya Charitamrita to just see how people behave in different circumstances. That is also very powerful. I don't know of a specific book, but I have come across books. I can't remember it right away. Okay, I think, and I think there was a question there. Is there a reason for the material creation, Mahatattva? Yes, there is. It's a classroom for us to become better servants. We are under training. We want to shed our selfishness and become selfless and focused on serving the senses of Krishna. And the Mahatattva creates enough frustration so that we are able to give up our subtle attachments and focus on the service to the Lord. Okay, I believe there aren't any more. And I think we can end today's session. Thank you very much for participating, and we will continue again in the following week. In the next week, we're going to read about the prayers offered by the demigods, and it'll be wonderful for us to see how those prayers go.